Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to do the second part of the leak list, which looks at ground vehicles and also some naval stuff too. We had a look at aviation yesterday, but ground vehicles are always the most fun, at least for me, since a lot of them nowadays have some pretty quirky designs. The stuff in this leak list is no different, and also at the same time, I just want to let you know, as kind of a pre-thing, in a few weeks we're going to be doing a really interesting giveaway in relation to a South African museum. I'll leave a link to their website, which the giveaway will be kind of going through. I'll give you some more details later on about it, but make sure to check it out, especially if you're a fan of history. As always, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and let's get into the leaks. The first vehicle is the Type 15 tank. Now this is a Chinese light vehicle which is incredibly modern. It's basically started production in the mid-2010s, and what it is the new third generation light tank for the PLA, or the Chinese forces. There is also an export version of it, so we could see it in other areas, and that's known as the VT5. The idea of this vehicle is pretty simple. The fact is, when you have pretty heavy vehicles like the ZTZ-99 and also the 96, they don't fit in a lot of terrain in the world. They're too heavy, they'll get bogged down, they'll get stuck in many different regions, whether it's kind of swampland or whether it's mountainous regions. So the idea of this light tank is to be able to still provide fire support in these areas without having the massive amount of weight on it. So this vehicle is only 30 tons. A lot of its armor, it relies on ERA that is actually put on it, but it also has access to a 105mm instead of the standard 125 that you see on a lot of the new Chinese vehicles. So the simple fact is this is lighter, still as mobile, if not more mobile. It actually has a 1,000 horsepower engine in it, which gives it about 30 horsepower per ton, which is pretty nuts. And then also on top of it, you can add different armor packages to keep this thing at least a decent amount armored. So yeah, the vehicle is pretty cool. It's one that I'm surprised we haven't actually seen before. And you know the hilarious thing? It is technically the successor to the Type 62, which kind of shows how long that thing was in service. The Type 62 was in service until 2013, and this vehicle was only added into service, at least as we know of, in 2018. So that Type 62 had a long service life. The other thing that's kind of cool about the Type 15, it does have hydropneumatic suspension, which is cool, and also it has all of the standard ammunition types, APFSDS, heat, you got ATGMs that you can throw with the vehicle too, and also some extra modern features. In general, this vehicle would be great to see, not just as the standard vehicle, but also the export version. Technically, there is also another one, which is used by the Bangladesh Army, which has a slightly different setup, but pretty much the same too. The SPYDER is leaked again, which doesn't really make a lot of sense as a vehicle to be added, but I'm sure it will be. Basically, this is a surface-to-air Python and Derby setup. We have the Python in the game, we have the Derby in the game. These are the active radar homing and also IR missiles, which you will see on the high-end Israeli vehicles. This system, the SPYDER, depending on which variant you look at, whether the SR, MR, or LR, all of these vehicles are designed for ground-to-air missile launches to be able to protect the area around it. And depending on which one you're looking at, you have the electro-optical imaging and infrared homing, which is the Python 5 that they use, and then also the active radar homing, which is the Derby. So yeah, it's pretty much as simple as that. There are a few different variants of the vehicles themselves and what they compromise of, but what you're ending up with is a truck with very, very good anti-air missiles on it. That's basically it. Talking about trucks with missiles on them, we have the AESA, the 9K33. Now, this is actually a vehicle which is supposed to come in for multiple territories: Germany, Italy, and also Russia. Italy would be obviously the Hungarian or Romanian version. I think it's the Romanian one which is used. But basically, this is another truck with access to the 9M33 missile. And depending on which variant you're looking at of the HUSSAR, it uses the different missiles. And that's pretty much the setup for it. There are a bunch of different variants and a bunch of different upgrades to this thing with different radars or different missiles that it kind of flies around with, all from the 9K33, which is the standard one, which uses the 9M33 missiles. Then you have the 9K33M3, which is the one which uses, guess what, the 9M33M3 missiles, which are better with an extended range on them, and also a IFF antenna, which is quite nice too. But yeah, generally you're just getting a truck with missiles on it, which will work very well. This vehicle was exported to a lot of different countries to be able to be used, and mainly the places that use it nowadays are the Russians, the Romanians, and then also the Belarusians. Also, Azerbaijan has some in, and of course Ukraine also has some too. You also have a favored son of the Kriegsmarine. It is the Bismarck, the battleship, which many people have been looking forward to. The Bismarck is one of those vehicles that lives kind of in a world of fanaticism, I suppose is the way that I would put it. This vehicle is one of the most successful projects, also from Blohm & Voss, since this was laid down in a Blohm & Voss shipyard. Blohm & Voss, if you don't know, are those guys from Germany who make those weird and wacky plane designs, but in the first place, they were actually shipbuilders. So they did build a lot of naval vessels for the Germans. So the Bismarck is one of two of its class, obviously the Bismarck class specifically. The Tirpitz had a slightly longer service history, but the Bismarck is well known for the vehicle which ammo-racked the hood, which we have in the game. The Bismarck has 8 15-inch guns, dual mounts of 4 sets. It also has 12 150mm guns in dual mounts, 16 105s in dual mounts, and then 37mm and 20mm all over it. The vehicle itself had a 320mm belt, so to be quite honest, if we have a look at all of its systems, it's not that different from what we've already seen in the game. And the interesting thing, at least for me, about stuff like the Bismarck is the simple fact that even though it has this kind of weird mysticism, fanaticism around it, it didn't really last very long. If you actually have a look at when it was launched and when it was destroyed, it's very close together. It was launched on the 14th of February 1939. It was commissioned into service in the 24th of August 1940, and then it was scuttled on the 27th of May 1941. So if you usually have a look at naval vehicles, they usually last 5 to 10 to 20 years and so on. The Bismarck in service lasted less than a year, and the actual time where it was taken out, it basically took a few weeks. It's crazy to think about how this mammoth of a vehicle that everybody talks about because of what it was had such a small impact on the war itself and how it kind of went. It also showed Germany that the Kriegsmarine were very much not up to snuff in terms of facing the Royal Navy. If they were able to lose this vehicle like this, which is why stuff like the Tirpitz and many others just never really did anything, and also why the transition away from battleships was one of those things that happened in the world. Because of the fact that air power was becoming so strong, there was no real need for these large ships because they were such a heavy investment and then eventually were just taken out so easily compared to what they would before, where they were the kings of the sea. Then we have kind of a contrast for the German Navy. This is the SMS Yorck. This vehicle was a early 1900s vehicle, one of the armored cruisers of the Rune class that the Germans built at the time. So this was very much more similar to kind of the battle cruiser idea, before the battle cruisers turned up. So it had a belt of about 100 millimeters. It had basically 4 mounted 8.3-inch guns, 10 15 centimeters, and also 14 8.8 centimeters, and a few torpedo tubes too. The problem with these armored cruisers, which were commissioned in 1905 and laid down in 1903, was they were not very good at the end of the day, because guess what turned up pretty much at the same time from the British? That's right, the Dreadnought. And the Dreadnought was one of those that completely shifted naval history when it came around. With the Dreadnought battleships turning up in the late 1900s, this completely meant that Victorian era or even, 1900 armored cruisers were basically obsolete. And the age of the Dreadnought battleships and battle cruisers was here and ready to ramp up. Now, unfortunately, the York itself didn't survive the First World War. It actually got nuked very early on the 12th of August 1914, where it was accidentally sunk by German mines. So even the Germans didn't like this machine compared to its competition. We have another ship, another battleship, and this is the HMS Warspite. With the Barham being a vehicle which was here for an event, it only makes sense that another Queen Elizabeth class battleship would turn up. And why not the most famous of them, the Warspite? This vehicle was laid down before the First World War, commissioned into service in 1915 during the good old First World War, and then decommissioned at the end of the Second World War. This vehicle served for a long time, basically 30 years of service, and was decorated many times with 15 battle honors that had turned up. The vehicle had 4 twin 15-inch guns, 14 single 6-inch ones, and also 2 single 3 inches when it was built. But the interesting thing about this is that is very similar to the Barham, right? But, of course, since this actually was in the Second World War II, it had many refits, including a 1937 one where they added 4 octuple 2-pounder sets of guns, which is always fun, the 40mm, 4 twin 102mm AA guns as well, and also some quadruple Vickers guns on top of it. So this would mean that the vehicle would have a lot more guns on it. They also increased the armor on the deck of it too, from about 3 inches to 5 inches, which would heavily improve its survivability against aircraft. The belt on it was 330mm, which also is quite effective too. So overall, the idea would be to add this in as a kind of sister to the Barham, and then maybe in the future we can get some of the other ones, such as the Queen Elizabeth herself. And then we have a couple of subtrees that are here, which I would be incredibly surprised if we see. The first one is the Poland subtree. Now, it doesn't say whether it's for air, whether it's for ground, or what it's for, but everybody kind of always talks of it in a ground way, basically because nowadays, in the modern era, Poland has a lot of vehicles that they've kind of brought in from everywhere, whether it's the South Korean MBTs, the Leopards that they have, or even just some AFVs that they've built themselves. The vehicles that they have access to is pretty impressive, plus also the stealth vehicles that they've kind of built to have a bit of fun with too, to test some ideas. Poland nowadays is a hell of a force, and they spend a lot on their military budget. And they also do a parade every year if you actually want to watch it. It's on YouTube and pretty fun. The major area where Poland kind of lacks is early on in the Second World War, and then also in the early Cold War. But the thing is, if it comes in as a subtree, that doesn't matter too much, because you can just bring in the later vehicles. If you added it as an independent, it would struggle in a few ways. It would be very similar to Israel in its setup, and unfortunately, because of that, probably wouldn't be very fun. So, the only question is, where do you put it? What nation do you stick it into? Now, for me, I would probably stick it into Britain, since they already have the Trzyniak and also the Garland, I believe, which is the blue water destroyer that the Polish used, and also the Polish Hurricane. But who knows? It could really go anywhere, and just depends on who needs it. But hopefully we do see Poland at some point. The other subtree is North Korea, which would go into China. North Korea has a bunch of interesting vehicles, whether it is for ground or aviation. One of the coolest things about their aviation is they actually use a lot of very old vehicles that even today are still airworthy. One of the major ones that they do use, though, is the Su-25. If you've ever watched the North Korean military parade, which once again I highly recommend because they are heavily edited and really funny. So whenever they move the flags, you hear a wonderful swoosh, and then whenever they show their sabers, you hear a wonderful swoosh as well. It's fantastic. And they even, for their Su-25 pilots, have this wonderful cinematic where they're putting on aviators, very similar to Top Gun, and then going out to fly the planes. It is really fun to watch. And I know, obviously, North Korea is a pretty rough regime, but at the same time, their military parade is second to none. The only people who beat them are the Chinese when they decide to do theirs. But generally, theirs are a little bit less. They don't do them as often as North Korea, so therefore they lose. But anyway, North Korea has one of my favorite vehicles, the Chonmaho, mainly because it's really fun to say. This is a modified Soviet vehicle, or Chinese vehicle, which has access to a bunch of different variants, which do a bunch of different stuff. The thing that I enjoy about the Chonmaho the most is there are variants of it where they've just mounted missiles on the top of it just as an AA platform for a tank, which I think is fantastic and we should see more of. But North Korea is one of those nations where it's probably quite hard to get information about their vehicles, but would actually be a pretty good subtree for China or any other nation, which makes sense for them. We also have a new mechanic, which would turn up, the AESA Radar. This is an active electronically scanned array. Now, I'm not going to, bullshit you, basically. I don't know what this is in its entirety, so I thought I'd just read the Wikipedia for you, since that's basically what everybody does anyway. So it's a type of phased array antenna, which is a computer-controlled antenna array in which the beam of radio waves can be electronically steered to point in different directions without moving the antenna. In the AESA, each antenna element is connected to a small solid-state transmit or receive module under the control of a computer, which performs the functions of a transmitter and or receiver for the antenna. This contrasts with a passive electronically scanned array, in which all the antenna elements are connected to a single transmitter and or receiver through phase shifters under the control of the computer. The AESA's main use is in radar, and these are known as the active phased array radar. So there you go. Simple as. It's an incredibly advanced radar, and some of the machines that we actually talked about in the previous episode of this did have access to it. So we'll have to see what that means in the game, if it does come in the next update. These leak lists, the early ones, are usually a little bit dubious, but it's always good to look at new information and kind of work out what may come. As always, though, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecovo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.